In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers touched the clouds and money seemed to flow like water, there lived a man named Richard. He wasn't just any man. He was one of the richest people in town. People called him a billionaire, but they also whispered that he was tough as nails. Richard had built his empire from scratch: real estate, tech companies, banks, you name it. But despite all his success, there was something, or rather someone, that always gave him trouble. His daughter, Emily, his only child, was nothing like him. While Richard thrived on rules, control, and making big deals, Emily cared about things like art, kindness, and helping others. She didn't care much for fancy parties or expensive clothes. Instead, she spent her days volunteering at shelters, painting pictures, and learning about history. Her father couldn't understand why she didn't want to take over the family, business, or live the high life he'd worked so hard to give her. To him, Emily's choices felt like a slap in the face. Things got even more complicated when Richard found out about Alex. Alex wasn't rich or powerful. In fact, he was the complete opposite. He was the gardener who took care of the lush green lawns and beautiful flower beds at their massive estate. Every day while working outside, Alex would hum tunes and tend to the plants with such care and patience. It was during these quiet moments that Emily often joined him, chatting about life, nature, and everything in between. Over time, what started as friendly conversations turned into something deeper. They fell in love. When Richard discovered this, he hit the roof. How could his daughter, a Hawthorne, be involved with someone like him? The thought made his blood boil. He demanded Emily end things immediately. But instead of listening to him, Emily stood up to her father for the first time in her life. This argument went on for weeks until Richard came up with a plan, a cruel, calculated plan. He decided to test Emily's loyalty by forcing her hand. One evening, he summoned her to his office. The room was grand, with polished wooden floors, leather chairs, and shelves lined with books and trophies. As Emily walked in, she could feel the tension in the air. Richard sat behind his desk, his eyes cold and piercing. Without wasting a moment, he laid down an ultimatum. "You have two options," he said sternly. "Either you marry this gardener within a month, or I cut you off completely. No inheritance, no support, nothing." The words hung in the air like thunderclouds. Emily stared at her father, shocked but not entirely surprised. She knew how stubborn he could be. After a long silence, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "Fine, I'll marry him." Richard froze. He hadn't expected her to agree so quickly. Deep down, he thought she'd beg him to reconsider, maybe even apologize. But no, she meant every word. For the first time, Richard realized he might have underestimated his daughter. Still, he refused to back down. If she wanted to throw her life away, then so be it. He told himself that once reality hit her, she'd come running back. Little did he know Emily wasn't planning to look back. As the news spread, whispers filled the halls of high society. Everyone talked about the scandal, the billionaire's daughter marrying the gardener. Some pitied Emily, thinking she was making a huge mistake. Others mocked her, saying she was ruining her family's reputation. But through it all, Emily stayed calm. She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't going to let anyone else decide her future for her. Meanwhile, Alex was nervous. He loved Emily deeply, but he couldn't help feeling like this whole situation was unfair. He didn't ask for any of this drama. All he wanted was to build a simple, happy life with the woman he loved. When Emily told him about her father's ultimatum, he offered to step aside if it would make things easier for her. But Emily shook her head firmly. "No," she said. "I'm not letting anyone dictate my life, not even him. We're doing this together." And so, preparations began for the wedding. There were no extravagant dresses or five-star venues. Instead, Emily chose a modest gown, and the ceremony was set to take place in the very gardens where she and Alex had first bonded. Friends pitched in to decorate the space with wildflowers and fairy lights. Alex's family traveled from out of town to celebrate the occasion, bringing warmth and laughter to the event. On the day of the wedding, the garden looked magical. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden shadows on the ground. Birds chirped in the background, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Emily walked down the aisle, her heart swelling with happiness. Richard, true to his word, didn't show up. He sent a letter instead, expressing his disappointment and warning her that she'd regret her decision. But Emily barely glanced at it. She was too busy smiling at Alex, standing under a canopy of blooms, ready to start their new chapter together. For Emily, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration of independence. For years, she had lived under her father's shadow, trying to meet his impossible standards. Now she was finally free. Free to choose her own path, free to love who she wanted, and free to define success on her own terms. As she exchanged vows with Alex, surrounded by people who truly cared about them, she felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. Little did she know, though, that this was only the beginning of their journey. Life after the wedding wouldn't be easy, but Emily was ready for whatever came next. After all, she had something far more valuable than money or status. She had love, courage, and the unwavering belief that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding day arrived, and it felt like a dream come true. Not the kind of dream filled with glittering diamonds and luxury cars, but the kind that warms your heart and makes you believe in love all over again. The gardens where Emily and Alex had shared so many quiet moments were transformed into a magical space. Strings of fairy lights hung from tree branches, glowing softly in the evening air. Bouquets of wildflowers sat on handmade wooden tables, their colors bright against the green backdrop. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it didn't need to be. Every detail was personal. Every corner told a story. Emily wore a simple white dress that she had picked out herself. It wasn't designer-made or covered in jewels, but it fit her perfectly, flowing gently as she walked. Her hair was tied back loosely, with just a few strands falling onto her face. She carried a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flower, and smiled brighter than anyone had ever seen her smile before. Alex stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a neat suit borrowed from his older brother. His hands were sweaty, and he kept adjusting his tie, but his eyes never left Emily's. When she finally reached him, they both knew this was the start of something real. Their friends and families gathered around, cheering and clapping as they exchanged vows. There weren't hundreds of guests, just a small group of people who truly mattered. Alex's mom dabbed tears from her eyes while his dad patted him proudly on the shoulder. Emily's best friend gave a speech about how brave she was for standing up to her father and choosing love over everything else. Even some of the staff from the estate showed up, bringing homemade dishes and desserts to share with everyone. But there was one person missing: Richard. He hadn't bothered to show up, which hurt Emily more than she let on. Still, she refused to let his absence ruin her special day. Instead, she focused on the people who were there, the ones who supported her no matter what. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Emily leaned her head on Alex's shoulder during their first dance. For the first time in her life, she felt completely at peace. Life after the wedding wasn't exactly easy. Emily woke up the next morning in a tiny apartment they'd rented together. It was nothing like the mansion she grew up in. The walls were bare. The furniture was secondhand, and the kitchen barely had enough counter space to make breakfast. But Emily didn't mind. In fact, she found joy in the little things, like waking up early to help Alex pack his tools for work or cooking dinner using recipes passed down from his grandmother. Alex worked long hours as a gardener, often coming home exhausted but still smiling because he knew he was working towards something bigger. He dreamed of starting his own landscaping business someday, a company that would focus on creating eco-friendly gardens and helping communities reconnect with nature. Emily encouraged him every step of the way, offering ideas and sketching designs late into the night. Together, they spent hours talking about their future, imagining what it might look like if they could turn their dreams into reality. Meanwhile, Emily started teaching art classes at a local community center. At first, she was nervous about stepping into a classroom full of kids and adults eager to learn. But soon she realized how much she loved it. Watching her students create something beautiful out of simple materials reminded her of her own journey, how sometimes the most meaningful things come from humble beginnings. On weekends, she volunteered at a nearby shelter, painting murals on the walls to brighten up the space. People started recognizing her not as the billionaire's daughter, but as someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. Despite their struggles, Emily and Alex never lost sight of why they had chosen this path. They relied on each other, finding strength in their partnership. Some days were harder than others, like when the rent was due and they had to scrape together every last penny, but they always managed to pull through. Their bond only grew stronger with time, proving that love isn't about wealth or status, it's about standing by each other no matter what. While Emily and Alex built their new life, Richard watched from afar. At first, he convinced himself that Emily would crack under the pressure. Surely she'd realize how hard life could be without his money and come begging for forgiveness. But weeks turned into months, and she never called. Instead, reports of her thriving in her new world began to reach him. Friends mentioned seeing her paintings displayed at a local gallery. Neighbors praised her kindness and dedication to helping those in need. Even some of his own employees whispered about how happy she seemed with Alex. Richard tried to ignore it all, telling himself it was just a phase. But deep down, doubt crept in. Was he wrong about her? Had he pushed her too far? These questions haunted him, especially late at night when the house felt eerily quiet without Emily's laughter echoing through the halls. He missed her, though he'd never admit it out loud. One evening, as he sat alone in his study flipping through old photo albums, he came across a picture of Emily as a child. She was sitting in the garden, surrounded by flowers, her face lit up with pure joy. Looking at that photo, Richard couldn't help but wonder where things had gone wrong. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing her as his little girl and started treating her like an extension of his empire. He had been so focused on shaping her into what he wanted her to be that he forgot to listen to what she wanted. For the first time in years, Richard allowed himself to feel something other than anger or pride. He felt regret. Maybe, just maybe he had made a mistake. And if that was true, then it was up to him to fix it. As winter approached, Emily and Alex faced another challenge. Money was tighter than usual, and Alex's boss had hinted at cutting back on hours due to budget cuts. Emily suggested picking up extra shifts at the community center, but Alex insisted she shouldn't have to work so hard. One chilly afternoon, as they sat bundled up on their couch drinking tea, Alex pulled out a worn notebook. Inside were sketches of garden designs, notes about sustainable practices, and a list of potential clients. "I think it's time," he said, his voice steady, despite the nerves in his eyes. "I want to take the leap and start my own business." Emily grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We'll do it together," she said. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out." That night, as they brainstormed ideas and pored over budgets, Emily felt a spark of excitement. Life wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But for the first time, she understood what it meant to truly live, to chase your dreams, to build something with someone you love, and to find happiness in the simplest of moments. Little did she know her father was about to re-enter their lives in a way neither of them expected. Winter turned into spring, and Emily and Alex found themselves busier than ever. The tiny apartment they called home was filled with sketches of garden designs, seed catalogs, and half-finished paintings. Their days started early and ended late, but neither of them complained. They were building something together, something real, something that mattered. Alex had taken the plunge and officially launched his own landscaping business. At first, it was just a few small jobs here and there, trimming, hedges for neighbors, planting flower beds for local businesses. But word spread quickly about his talent and dedication. People loved how he transformed ordinary spaces into vibrant green havens. Before long, he was getting calls from people all over town asking for his help. Each new project brought its own set of challenges, but Alex tackled them with enthusiasm, always coming up with creative solutions. Emily played a big role in his success too. She helped design layouts, suggesting unique ideas that blended functionality with beauty. Her artistic eye added a special touch to every garden they worked on. Together, they dreamed of expanding their work beyond private backyards, to parks, schools, and even abandoned lots that could use a little love. It wasn't just about making money. It was about creating spaces where people could connect with nature and each other. Meanwhile, Emily's art career began to take off as well. One of her paintings caught the attention of a curator at a local gallery during an open house event. The piece, a colorful depiction of a community garden, resonated deeply with visitors. Within weeks, Emily had her first solo exhibition. On opening night, the gallery buzzed with excitement. Friends, strangers, and even some of Alex's clients showed up to support her. As she stood in front of her artwork, answering questions, and sharing stories behind each painting, Emily felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. But not everything was smooth sailing. Running two separate ventures meant long hours and constant juggling. There were days when Emily felt overwhelmed, wondering if they were biting off more than they could chew. And then there were moments when Alex doubted himself, worrying that he wasn't cut out to run his own business. Yet whenever one of them faltered, the other was there to lift them back up. They reminded each other why they had chosen this path, to live authentically, to chase their passions, and to create a life that reflected their values. As their lives became busier, Richard noticed a shift in the way people talked about his daughter. Once dismissed as the rebellious heiress who threw away her privileged life, Emily was now being hailed as an inspiration. Articles popped up in local newspapers praising her art and highlighting her commitment to giving back to the community. Social media posts celebrated Alex's innovative approach to sustainable gardening. Even Richard's own colleagues mentioned the couple's achievements during casual conversations. At first, Richard brushed it off, telling himself it was just a phase, but deep down he couldn't ignore the growing sense of pride and guilt creeping into his heart. He remembered the ultimatum he'd given Emily: marry the gardener or lose everything. He had expected her to crumble under the weight of poverty, to realize how foolish she was being. Instead, she had thrived. Not only had she built a fulfilling life, but she had also inspired others along the way. One evening, while sitting alone in his study, Richard pulled out a newspaper clipping featuring Emily's latest art exhibit. The headline read, "From Privilege to Purpose: How One Woman Found Happiness Outside Wealth." Below it was a photo of Emily standing next to one of her paintings, smiling warmly. For a moment, Richard forgot about his empire, his power, and his need for control. All he saw was his daughter, the same girl who used to sit in the garden making daisy chains, laughing without a care in the world. He thought about all the times he had pushed her to conform, to follow in his footsteps. He had wanted her to carry on the family legacy, to uphold the Hawthorne name with pride. But now, looking at what she had accomplished on her own terms, he realized she had done something far greater. She had forged her own legacy, one rooted in kindness, creativity, and resilience. Richard knew he couldn't keep ignoring her. If he wanted to repair their relationship, he needed to act. But he also knew it wouldn't be easy. After everything he had said and done, earning her trust back would take time and humility. Still, he decided to try. He picked up the phone and called Emily, inviting her to dinner. To his surprise, she accepted, but with one condition: Alex had to come too. The night of the dinner arrived, and Richard felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. He chose a quiet restaurant known for its cozy atmosphere, hoping it would make the conversation less formal and more personal. When Emily and Alex walked in, Richard stood up to greet them. For a brief moment, the three of hers locked eyes. There was tension in the air, but also a glimmer of hope. They ordered food and made small talk at first, tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. Eventually, Richard cleared his throat and leaned forward. "I want to start by saying I'm sorry," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've spent so much of my life trying to shape you into someone I thought you should be. But lately, I've realized I was wrong. You've built a life that's meaningful, not because of money or status, but because of who you are and what you stand for." Emily listened quietly, her expression unreadable. Alex reached for her hand under the table, offering silent support. When Richard finished speaking, Emily took a deep breath. "Dad," she said softly, "I appreciate your apology, and I know it can't have been easy for you to say those words. But healing our relationship isn't going to happen overnight. You hurt me, and it's going to take time for me to trust you again." Richard nodded, understanding. "I don't expect forgiveness right away," he replied. "But I'd like to try. I want to get to know the woman you've become, and maybe, if you'll let me, be part of your journey moving forward." For the rest of the evening, they talked openly about their hopes, fears, and dreams. Emily shared stories about her art and teaching, while Alex spoke passionately about his vision for sustainable gardening. Richard listened intently, amazed by how much they had achieved despite the odds stacked against them. By the end of the meal, the tension had eased slightly, replaced by a cautious optimism. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Richard shook Alex's hand firmly. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," he said sincerely. Alex smiled, nodding. "She takes care of me too," he replied. Walking side by side, Emily glanced at her father, then at Alex. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where they might all coexist peacefully, not as enemies but as allies. It wouldn't be perfect, and there would still be bumps along the road. But for now, that glimmer of hope was enough. After that dinner, things between Emily, Alex, and Richard didn't magically go back to normal. Healing takes time, especially when years of hurt and misunderstanding pile up like bricks in a wall. But for the first time in a long while, there was a crack in that wall, a tiny ray of light peeking through. Both sides were willing to try, and that made all the difference. Richard started small. He began sending Emily little notes. Nothing too grand, just short messages checking in on her or sharing an article he thought she might find interesting. At first, Emily wasn't sure how to respond. She wanted to believe her father was sincere, but old wounds don't heal overnight. Still, she appreciated the effort. Slowly, they fell into a rhythm of exchanging emails and texts. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Alex, on the other hand, remained cautious. He trusted Emily completely, but he couldn't forget how Richard had treated him in the past. The man who once dismissed him as just a gardener now seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him better. One day, Richard showed up at their apartment unannounced, holding a bottle of wine and asking if they'd have dinner together. Alex hesitated, glancing at Emily for guidance. She gave him a reassuring nod, so he agreed. That evening turned out to be surprisingly pleasant. They cooked a simple meal together, pasta with vegetables from Alex's latest garden project, and talked about everything except the past. Richard asked questions about Alex's work, genuinely curious about his ideas for sustainable gardening. Alex opened up more than he expected, explaining how he dreamed of transforming urban spaces into green oases where people could reconnect with nature. By the end of the night, Richard surprised them both by offering to help fund one of Alex's upcoming projects. "I've done some research," Richard said, leaning back in his chair after dessert. "Your vision aligns with what many cities are looking for right now. If you're serious about expanding your business, I'd like to invest." Emily stared at her father, stunned. Was this really happening? Alex looked equally shocked, but quickly recovered. "That's very generous," he said carefully. "But why?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I owe you both an apology. And because I see now that you're not just building gardens, you're building communities. That's something worth supporting." It was a turning point. For Emily, it felt like her father was finally seeing her and Alex for who they truly were, not through the lens of wealth or status, but as individuals with dreams and values worth respecting. For Alex, it was a chance to take his passion to the next level. After discussing it thoroughly, they decided to accept Richard's offer, but only on the condition that it remained a partnership, not charity. Richard respected their decision. and promised to step back once the initial funding was secured. With Richard's support, Alex's business grew faster than anyone had imagined. His team expanded, taking on bigger projects like rooftop gardens, community parks, and even urban farms. Local news outlets covered his work, praising his innovative approach to sustainability. People loved the idea of turning concrete jungles into green havens, and soon, requests poured in from neighboring towns. Emily played a crucial role in this growth too. Her artistic eye added a unique flair to every design, ensuring that each space wasn't just functional but also beautiful. Together they became a powerhouse duo, blending creativity with practicality. Their success caught the attention of environmental organizations, which reached out to collaborate on large-scale initiatives. Before long, Alex was invited to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing his vision with audiences across the country. But despite their growing fame, Emily and Alex stayed grounded. They continued volunteering at shelters and teaching art and gardening classes to underserved communities. Their mission wasn't just about making money, it was about giving back and inspiring others to create positive change. Every time they saw a child planting their first flower, or a family enjoying a newly renovated park, they knew they were on the right path. As Alex's career soared, Emily's art gained even more recognition. Her paintings, inspired by the gardens they created, together resonated deeply with viewers. Critics praised her ability to capture the essence of nature and humanity in her work. Galleries from other cities started reaching out, inviting her to showcase her pieces internationally. It was thrilling, but also overwhelming. One afternoon, as Emily sat in her studio surrounded by half-finished canvases, Alex walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You look stressed," he said, handing her a cup. "What's going on?" She sighed, setting down her brush. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Alex. All these opportunities. It's amazing, but it feels like a lot of pressure." He sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to do everything at once," he reminded her. "Take it step by step. And remember, you're not alone. We'll figure it out together." His words calmed her nerves. She realized she didn't have to tackle everything on her own. With Alex by her side, and even her father slowly becoming part of their journey, she felt supported in ways she hadn't before. Meanwhile, Richard found himself changing in ways he never anticipated. Working alongside Emily and Alex gave him a fresh perspective on life. He saw how much joy came from creating something meaningful, rather than simply accumulating wealth. He started spending less time in boardrooms and more time visiting the gardens Alex designed. Watching people interact with these green spaces, children laughing, couples strolling hand in hand, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. He also made an effort to mend his relationship with Emily. Instead of focusing solely on grand gestures, he focused on the small moments, attending her art exhibits, cheering her on during teaching sessions, and simply being present. Over time, Emily began to let her guard down, allowing herself to trust him again. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension, but the bond they shared grew stronger with each passing day. One sunny morning, Emily and Alex stood in the middle of a newly completed park, watching as families explored the walking trails and kids played near the flower beds. It was one of their proudest achievements yet. A once neglected lot transformed into a vibrant community hub. As they held hands, soaking in the scene, Richard approached them with a smile. "You've done incredible work here," he said, looking around. "I'm proud of you both." Emily glanced at him, then at Alex. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly. "That means a lot." In that instant, something shifted. The three of them weren't just father, daughter, and son-in-law anymore. They were a team, united by shared values and a common goal. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but they were ready to face it, together. As the months rolled by, Emily and Alex's lives continued to flourish in ways they had never imagined. Their days were filled with purpose, working on projects that made a real difference, spending time with people who inspired them, and building a future together that felt more rewarding than anything money could buy. But even as their successes mounted, they remained grounded, always remembering where they came from and why they had chosen this path. Richard, too, was changing in subtle, yet profound ways. He wasn't the same man who had once dismissed Alex as just a gardener, or demanded his daughter conform to his rigid expectations. Spending time with Emily and Alex had opened his eyes to a different kind of success, one that wasn't measured in dollars or deals, but in connections, creativity, and impact. He began attending Alex's gardening workshops, not because he needed to learn how to plant flowers, but because he wanted to understand what drove his son-in-law's passion. He listened intently as Alex explained the importance of sustainable practices, nodding thoughtfully when he talked about how green spaces could transform entire neighborhoods. At first, it felt strange for Richard to step into this new role as an observer rather than a controller, but he embraced it wholeheartedly. One Saturday morning, while helping Alex set up a community garden event, Richard found himself elbow-deep in soil, planting saplings alongside volunteers. It was messy, tiring work, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. As he wiped dirt off his hands and watched families gather around to admire the freshly planted trees, he realized how much he had missed out on by focusing solely on wealth and power. Emily noticed these changes in her father, and while she didn't say much, she appreciated them. She saw the way he interacted with Alex now, with respect and admiration, and it warmed her heart. There were still moments when old habits crept in, like when Richard would casually suggest improvements to one of Alex's designs or try to take charge during meetings. But instead of snapping at him, Emily would gently remind him that this was their project, not his. To his credit, Richard usually backed off, laughing self-consciously and apologizing. These small interactions became opportunities for growth, helping them rebuild trust and understanding. One evening, after a long day working on a new garden installation, Emily and Alex sat down with Richard over dinner. The conversation turned to the future, what they hoped to achieve next, both personally and professionally. Alex shared his dream of expanding their work beyond the city, bringing sustainable gardens to rural areas struggling with food insecurity. Emily chimed in, talking about her plans to collaborate with schools, teaching kids about art and environmentalism through interactive workshops. Richard listened quietly, marveling at their ambition. When they finished speaking, he leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You two have big dreams," he said, "and I think you're capable of achieving every single one of them. But let me ask you something. What can I do to help?" The question caught them off guard. For so long, Richard had been a distant figure, hovering on the sidelines of their lives. Now, here he was, offering his support, not as a billionaire, throwing money at problems, but as someone genuinely invested in their success. After a moment of silence, Emily smiled. "You've already done so much," she said. "But if you really want to help, maybe you could use your influence to connect us with organizations or communities that need our work." Richard nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Done," he replied firmly. "Consider it my mission." True to his word, Richard threw himself into helping Emily and Alex expand their reach. Using his network of contacts, he arranged meetings with nonprofit leaders, government officials, and corporate sponsors interested in sustainability initiatives. He even accompanied them to some of these meetings, sitting quietly in the background while they presented their ideas. His presence added credibility, but it was clear to everyone that the vision belonged entirely to Emily and Alex. One particularly memorable project took them to a small town several hours outside the city. The area had been hit hard by economic decline, leaving abandoned lots and crumbling buildings in its wake. With Richard's help, they secured funding to transform one of these lots into a thriving community garden. Over the course of several weeks, they worked alongside local residents, teaching them how to grow fruits and vegetables, and creating a space where neighbors could come together. On the day of the grand opening, the atmosphere was electric. Children ran between rows of plants, picking ripe tomatoes and cucumbers. Elderly residents sat on benches, chatting happily as they admired the colorful flower beds. A local band played lively music, adding to the festive mood. Standing in the middle of it all, Emily felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't just a garden, it was proof that change was possible, that even the most neglected places could bloom with care and effort. Richard stood beside her, his gaze sweeping over the scene. "This is incredible," he murmured. "You've done something truly remarkable here." Emily turned to look at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. "Thank you for believing in us." For the first time in years, Richard felt a sense of pride that had nothing to do with his own accomplishments. Watching Emily and Alex thrive, seeing the joy they brought to others, made him realize how empty his life had been before. Success wasn't about climbing higher, it was about lifting others up. Despite all the progress, there were still challenges. Not everyone welcomed their efforts with open arms. Some critics accused them of gentrification, claiming their projects pushed low-income residents out of revitalized areas. Others dismissed their work as naive, arguing that gardens couldn't solve systemic issues like poverty or unemployment. These criticisms stung, especially for Alex, who sometimes doubted whether they were making a real difference. But Emily refused to let negativity bring them down. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she reminded him one night as they sat on their apartment balcony staring at the stars. "What matters is that we're trying. Every seed we plant, every person we inspire, that's progress." Alex smiled, reaching for her hand. "You're right," he said. "And besides, we've got each other. That's enough to keep going." Their resilience inspired those around them, including Richard. He started speaking publicly about the importance of supporting grassroots initiatives, using his platform to amplify their message. At first, he worried about backlash from his peers, many of whom still valued profit over purpose. But as he watched the positive impact of Emily and Alex's work, he stopped caring about approval. For the first time in his life, he felt aligned with something greater than himself. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. Richard no longer felt like an outsider looking in. He was part of their team, contributing in ways that mattered. Whether it was brainstorming ideas, making introductions, or simply lending a listening ear, he found joy in being useful. And for Emily and Alex, having him involved added a layer of stability and encouragement they hadn't expected. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they gathered in the backyard of their home, a modest house they had recently purchased together, they reflected on how far they'd come. The air smelled of fallen leaves, and the golden sunlight bathed everything in warmth. Emily held up her sketchbook, showing Richard a design for their next big project. A massive urban park featuring art installations, walking trails, and edible gardens. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement. Richard studied the drawing, his lips curving into a smile. "I think it's brilliant," he said, "and I know exactly who to call to get it started." They laughed, the sound carrying through the quiet neighborhood. In that moment, surrounded by love, laughter, and shared dreams, they knew they were unstoppable. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as individuals, but as a family. The Urban Park project became the biggest challenge Emily, Alex, and Richard had ever taken on. It wasn't just about planting trees or designing flower beds. It was about creating a space that could truly transform a community. The area they chose for the park was in one of the city's most neglected neighborhoods, filled with crumbling buildings and empty lots overrun by weeds. For years, people had passed through without stopping, avoiding the place altogether. But Emily and Alex saw potential where others saw decay. From the very beginning, they knew this wouldn't be easy. They needed permits, funding, and approval from city officials who weren't always eager to greenlight such ambitious projects. There were heated debates at town hall meetings, with some residents skeptical of outsiders coming in to fix their neighborhood. Others worried the park would attract more traffic and noise, disrupting what little peace they had left. But, instead of backing down, Emily and Alex leaned into these concerns, holding open forums to listen to the community's needs and ideas. Richard played a crucial role during this phase. Using his influence, he arranged sit-downs with key decision-makers, smoothing over bureaucratic hurdles that might have derailed the project. He also helped secure additional funding from corporate sponsors, ensuring they had the resources to bring their vision to life. Yet he made it clear that the final decisions belonged to Emily and Alex. This time he wasn't trying to take control. He was there to support. As construction began, the trio spent countless hours on site, working alongside volunteers and local workers. Emily sketched out designs for art installations, blending sculptures and murals into the landscape. Alex focused on the gardens, choosing native plants that would thrive in the environment while teaching volunteers how to care for them. Richard, despite his age, rolled up his sleeves and joined in whenever he could, whether it was hauling bags of soil or painting benches. Though he wasn't used to manual labor, he found himself enjoying the physical work and the camaraderie it brought. Months later, the park finally opened to the public. On the day of the unveiling, the entire neighborhood turned out to celebrate. Kids ran around laughing, climbing on playground equipment and chasing each other through winding paths. Families spread picnic blankets under shady trees, sharing food and stories. Seniors sat on benches watching the bustle with smiles on their faces. Everywhere you looked, there was life, vibrant, joyful, and alive. At the center of the park stood a large mural painted by Emily, depicting scenes of nature intertwined with human activity. Birds flew across the sky, children played among flowers, and hands reached out to plant seeds. Beneath it, a plaque read, "This park is dedicated to the power of growth, of people, plants, and possibilities." As Emily stood before the crowd, microphone in hand, she felt overwhelmed with emotion. "This park belongs to all of us," she said, her voice steady but filled with pride. "It's proof that when we come together, we can create something beautiful. Thank you for believing in this dream and making it a reality." The applause was thunderous, echoing through the park like waves crashing against a shore. Alex wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." Richard watched from the sidelines, his chest swelling with pride. He thought back to the ultimatum he had given Emily years ago, the cruel demand that had pushed her away. Now, standing here, surrounded by laughter and joy, he realized how wrong he had been. If he hadn't forced her into that impossible choice, none of this might have happened. She wouldn't have discovered her strength, and he wouldn't have learned to see the world and his daughter in a new light. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, Richard pulled Emily aside. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for what I did back then, but for everything. You've shown me what it means to live with purpose, and I'll never forget that." Emily hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, "for believing in us now." In the months that followed, the park became a hub of activity. Local schools organized field trips, teaching kids about ecology and sustainability. Artists hosted workshops encouraging creativity in unexpected places. Even small businesses sprang up nearby, drawn by the influx of visitors. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to change, not because of gentrification, but because of hope. People started taking pride in their community again, investing in its future rather than abandoning it. For Emily and Alex, the success of the park marked the start of even bigger dreams. They began traveling to other cities, sharing their story, and helping communities replicate their model. Each new project brought fresh challenges, but also new opportunities to connect with people and inspire change. Along the way, Richard continued to play a vital role, using his resources and connections to amplify their efforts. But perhaps the greatest transformation was within Richard himself. Gone was the cold, calculating man who valued money above all else. In his place stood someone softer, kinder, a man who understood that true wealth came not from bank accounts but from relationships, shared experiences, and the positive impact you leave behind. He started mentoring young entrepreneurs, offering guidance without strings attached. He volunteered regularly, finding fulfillment in giving back, And most importantly, he cherished every moment he spent with Emily and Alex, grateful for a second chance to be part of their lives. One crisp winter morning, as snow blanketed the park, Emily and Alex took a quiet walk together. The bare branches of the trees sparkled with frost, and the air smelled clean and fresh. Hand in hand, they strolled along the paths they had helped build, reflecting on how far they'd come. "You know," Emily said after a long silence, "I used to think happiness meant freedom. From rules, expectations, all of it. But now, I realize happiness isn't about running away. It's about building something meaningful, something that lasts." Alex nodded, squeezing her hand. "And we've done that," he said. "Together." They stopped near the mural, gazing up at the vibrant colors that seemed to defy the grayness of winter. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily turned to Alex with a mischievous grin. "What do you say we start planning our next big adventure?" He laughed, pulling her closer. "I say let's do it." Behind them, Richard approached, bundled up in a coat and scarf. "Mind if I join?" he asked, smiling warmly. "Of course not," Emily replied, reaching out to include him. "After all, we're a team." As the three of them stood there, framed by the beauty of the park they had created together, they knew this was just the beginning. Life would always have its ups and downs, but as long as they faced them side by side, they could handle anything. Together, they had proven that love, resilience, and a shared vision could turn even the wildest dreams into reality.